Hi, and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. This time around, we're looking at a couple of science fiction films from the 1950s. One of them is very well known. The other one isn't, but stars somebody who's very well known. Science fiction in the 1950s was really obsessed with several things. First off, with nuclear energy and the perils of nuclear energy, and the long-term effects of nuclear energy, and American imperialism, which at the time was the only socially acceptable kind of imperialism to have. The discovery and the use of nuclear weapons really put a bolt of lightning through society. They suddenly realised that science was dangerous stuff, and science would have and could have profound effects on the future of the world. And this was probably the time when science fiction started getting a little more respect than it had otherwise. Before then, it was all Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, and not to be taken seriously at all, and in a sense a genre for kids. So we'll take these ones in reverse chronological order because that's the way I want to do it. We'll take a look at a 1956 science fiction movie called World Without End, which is not a good title for a science fiction movie because it's a biblical kind of quote. And for me, keep your science and your religion separate, just like you should politics and religion. They're kind of different realms. Keep them well apart and don't let them fight it out in an alley. This one, directed by Edward Burns, well, this movie shares a plot with a number of subsequent science fiction movies, and in a weird way, it's a kind of flipping of the plot of H.G. Wells' Time Machine. In this one, 4 American astronauts travel in 1957 in a rocket ship around Mars, circumnavigating it and seeing what's up with Mars. And on the way home, something glitches. They start accelerating madly and out of control as some kind of a storm hits them, and they all black out. And when they wake up, they've crash landed in a mountain slope on Earth. They soon figure out it is Earth, but things aren't as they were. Eventually, the scientists patch together the fact that they've travelled so fast they've got a time dilation effect, and they've travelled into the future. It turns out to be 2508 AD, and the world has had some problems. The first thing they come upon is a graveyard with a whole bunch of tombstones that tell them that something happened in the 22nd century, and that explains the higher than normal background radiation levels. Even though it is much lower than it would have been in the past, background radiation is about 3 times what it was when they left Earth. What they don't explain is if they were travelling near the speed of light for roughly 400 or 500 years, how they went around and came back again, because they would have had to travel 450 to 500 light years in a big curve, coming back and crashing on Earth in North America, which was incredibly convenient. But then these movies do rely on a lot of coincidence. Guys are camping, and one of them's really racked up because he had a wife and kids back in the 20th century, all of whom have died centuries ago, so he's a bit melancholy for about 5 minutes. And then they come upon a whole bunch of fur-wearing troglodyte-type characters with one eye, because they are what the movie calls mutates. They've been messed around genetically by radiation, and they have large stone axes, which is kind of silly because there's got to be a lot of metal lying around after a 22nd century technological civilization crashed, but apparently not. Apparently stone axes are the way to go. The 4 astronauts fight them off with guts and fortitude and pistols, and they hide in a cave. First cave they hide in, not the right one to hide in. It's got dog-sized spiders in it. And they shoot the spiders and cut their way free with machetes of the enormous spider webs they find in there. 1950s science fiction movies of a certain type were really big on giant spiders, which I kind of like. I live in a land of giant spiders, so very much made me feel at home. Then they go into another cave for reasons of hiding from giant cyclops troglodytes, and they find a metal wall at the back of the cave and an underground civilization of human beings living at a high technological level, but they're scared shitless of conflict. They also have that other wonderful trope of 1950s science fiction movies of a certain type, in that all of the men are puny and weak and kind of old and wrinkly, and all of the women are incredibly beautiful and have for some reason access to max factor makeup. And this is this civilization which is never given a name. is a little bit wary of these guys from the 20th century because they know that their civilization is the one that destroyed the world, and the guys are hunky, which is proved when one of the astronauts, played by Australian local boy Rod Taylor, takes his shirt off and shows them what a guy really looks like. The women are instantly smitten with him because it's Rod Taylor in the 1950s and he's a good-looking rooster, and two of them at least are infatuated with him, which shows that heterosexuality is the norm in 2508. As the guys investigate this civilization, they find out the birth rates are declining and all of the kids are listless and sickly looking, and they know that within a generation or two this underground civilization is going to die out because kids aren't getting enough vitamins and sunlight, apparently. They decide they want to help them, and the way to do that is to get a beachhead outside the caves, keeping away the troglodytes. And what they find out is the troglodytes are actually the upper class of the civilization on the surface of the earth. They're the Morlocks, but they're living above ground of this civilization, and that all the people under them are normal human beings. But one of the people below ground doesn't like that idea because the girl he was lusting after has taken up with Rod Taylor. He's a guy called Maurice, played by Bruce Coleman, who later had a gig playing one of the apes in the Planet of the Apes TV series. He gaslights the leaders of the civilization about the nature of these men, basically commits crimes and blames them for the crimes. All that kind of stuff goes on, and he very nearly hijacks the whole thing and destroys their civilization by basically being jealous. This does not work out well for him long term, and the guys, with the aid of the civilization, create a beachhead. The way they do this is the four of them go out there with their pistols and a bazooka that the people underground have made for them, and basically blast these troglodytes with bazooka rounds until they give up. And then the leader of the astronauts challenges the leader of the troglodytes to a duel, defeats him, and all is well with the world and everybody lives above ground. Kumbaya. This is such a stock standard 1950s science fiction movie. Rod Taylor, using a very plummy English accent, which doesn't entirely eradicate his western suburbs Sydney Australian accent, steals the movie. This is when Rod Taylor first had a contract with American Studios. He was under contract to MGM. He turned up in movies like Raintree County, for instance, a really big budget MGM movie with Elizabeth Taylor and Montgomery Clift in it, and also Lee Marvin for that matter. So his star is on the ascendant, and Hugh Marlowe plays the ostensible leader of the group, Borden. And Hugh Marlowe was a kind of ordinary actor. He had no charisma to speak of. And the director, Edward Burns, said of him that he was unprepared and lazy, which means he didn't know his lines when he came to set, and he didn't go out of his way to give his character any oomph. This is also one of those movies that reuses a lot of stuff from previous films. They use stuff from Flight to Mars and a bunch of other movies, so it was kind of patched together out of other films, but it's not without its entertainment value. The one-eyed mutates are kind of amusing. None of them's got any character at all. They're not so much underwritten as not written. They're basically there to go raw, to throw things, to bash things with clubs, and to very clumsily wrestle with the main actors. In spite of that, the production values are pretty good. The movie was filmed in Technicolor and CinemaScope, so it's very widescreen. The costumes and the makeup are pretty good, but it's still just a programmer. And there are a couple of spots in the movie where I thought, if they just had have gone this way a little bit with this film, it would have been much better than the way they went. They kind of went with the obvious stuff. And the movie has a lot of parallels with movies like The Time Travelers from 1964. And as I said, it does flip the idea of a far future underground civilization from the time machine. And in fact, the estate of H.G. Wells was at one stage threatening to sue them. That never came to pass. So you got a little bit of everything in here. You got beautiful women, you got ugly mutants, you got the beefcake of Rod Taylor, you've got rocket ships, and you've got a silly plot. But it's kind of amusing while not being wonderfully memorable. I can think of 2 or 3 other movies this movie very much resembles. And if it wasn't for Rod Taylor, it wouldn't be anywhere near as interesting. The other movies this has been compared to as well with the plots, I've got it here. The Mole People, yeah, it's very much like the Mole People, except the underground civilization is in the Andes in the Mole People. A film that's very underrated. The Time Travelers and Planet of the Apes for that matter. Yeah, I can see the parallels to Planet of the Apes there as well. But it's very much a B movie, even though it does look really good in CinemaScope. But then it's very hard to do CinemaScope badly. That brings me to the second movie, a movie made by Disney, a studio I don't particularly like. Second movie I got for you is one that's very well known, and it is, in a sense, one of the proto-steampunk movies of cinema. It's from a studio that I don't have a lot of time for, being Disney. The reason I don't have a lot of time for Disney is I had a lot of very bad Disney live-action movies inflicted on me when I was a kid at Saturday matinees, and so I've always resented Disney and their kidification of movies, which continues to this day in the censorship they're doing on the stuff that they produce, and also that they're inflicting on some things they now have the rights to. It is, of course, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, with Kirk Douglas, James Mason, Paul Lucas, Peter Lorre, and a seal called Esmeralda. I was cruising around looking for something to watch and looking at my streaming services and at various online sources, and I thought, I should watch this one again. And I did, and I enjoyed it, and even though I do have qualifications about it. And before we get to qualifications, it's beautifully shot for a start. It's filmed partly on location in Jamaica and the Bahamas, and also a little bit in Death Valley. It won 2 Academy Awards for production design and the way it looks. And to be honest with you, the production design is great. The evocation of the Nautilus really works. That kind of Victorian Gerda-like Issabard Kingdom Brunel look, combined with a slightly futuristic oceanic motif, really works. And the updating of the technology works as well. Captain Nemo's submarine is atomic powered because atomic power was king shit in the 1950s. Makes you wonder a little bit why, if Captain Nemo developed nuclear power in the 1870s, let's say, why didn't he just develop nuclear weapons instead of making an atomic submarine to sink warships with? He could have done a lot more with a lot less. But then it wouldn't have been a Disney movie if he had. And also, it wouldn't be a Jules Verne adaptation if he had. Some of the casting's pretty good. I liked Paul Lucas as Professor Aronnax. He does a nice job of that. And Peter Lorre playing his assistant Conseil is a lot of fun. Peter Lorre steals any scene he's in any time. And then he goes up against another scene stealer par excellence in Kirk Douglas, and those two guys playing off each other. You can tell they're having a good time of it. There's a lot of to and fro between those two, which lifts the movie's characters to a really high level. I have more of a problem with James Mason's Captain Nemo. In the book, of course, Captain Nemo is an Indian prince, and James Mason is made up to look a little more swarthy than he does normally, and a lot more swarthy than a white guy would if he lived most of his life in a submarine. And James Mason's reading of Captain Nemo isn't quite what I'd like of Captain Nemo. Captain Nemo, for me, needs to be a lot more rugged than James Mason is. And even though he does some pretty egregious things in the movie, that sense of righteous villainy is a little bit lacking because James Mason doesn't quite bring the riz to it that it needs. Now, I'm not knocking James Mason as an actor. Odd Man Out, Larger Than Life, a whole bunch of other films. He has been superb in those. But you needed somebody a little more, maybe, a little more of a cross between, say, James Mason and Sterling Hayden would have worked. If they could have crossbred them and developed a human being, that would have been perfect. You needed somebody with a little more of that toughness. The guy's been to Rurapente prison and has escaped with a whole bunch of incredibly loyal submariners. By the way, Disney has just completed a mini-series about Captain Nemo called Nautilus, which they then passed on to AMC, and AMC is going to be releasing this short series sometime this year. Whether it's good or not, I don't know. Maybe Disney didn't like how kind of tough this series is going to be. But it does show that once Disney grabs onto an intellectual property, they never let go. So many years later, they're still pumping out product based on the same intellectual property. But the look of the film is fun. There's the groovy bits at the start where Ned Land, played by Kirk Douglas, is wandering around San Francisco with a sex worker under each arm and having a good time of things. It's one of the few Disney movies that has sex workers in it, by the way. It's also one of the few Disney movies that has a suicide cult. But leaving that aside, it does have moments of Disneyfication. It does have the scene when Professor Aradax and Ned Land and Conseil go on shore in New Guinea and get chased by cannibals, none of whom look particularly Papuan, which is very much a Disney thing. Disney adventure films of that type at the time, including In Search of the Castaways, were full of cannibals because that was an instant tick on scary black people. In Search of the Castaways, they use Maori cannibals, and there's not too much evidence that Maori were ever cannibals, but then white people set the agendas in cinema in the 1950s and 1960s, but there are a whole bunch of good things. The special effects on the submarine are terrific. For the 1950s, they are something truly extraordinary. And in the 1950s, Disney was the goat for special effects technology. In fact, MGM used them to create the monster from the id in Forbidden Planet because they were that good. So the sub was fantastic. The evocation of the period was great, particularly in the Nautilus. And the Nautilus, every tiny bit of it is just so carefully designed to be nautical and steampunky that just looking at any frame of the stuff filmed inside the submarine is a beautiful thing to behold. There is one of the climaxes of the film with the fight with the giant squid on the decks of the Nautilus. Originally it was filmed on a calm day, and there wasn't the storm in the background, and it didn't look right. It didn't really have the grunt, and the cameras and the technicians had trouble hiding the mechanics of the animatronic squid. And then somebody decided to refilm all of that after they had filmed it, with the storms and the waves and the thunder and the lightning, and the filming it in an evening setting, and it just landed. They had fewer problems hiding the mechanism, and it also upped the amount of threat in that particular scene. But for me, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is one of the few Disney live action films that doesn't leave a bad taste in my mouth anywhere. Yes, it does have the cute seal, and particularly Kirk Douglas interacting with the seal is fun, but it's not that kind of cute that's annoying. It's not kind of over the top pandering to the little kiddies cute that Disney too often had been guilty of. It sits well as a 1950s steampunk science fiction movie, and all respect to Disney for that. I think my big issue with Disney is, for all but a century now, Disney has been held prisoner by the early 20th century Midwestern mentality of Walt Disney. And that's one of the legacies that they really need to ditch. Yes, there have been a whole bunch of things made by Disney since then, which would have made Walt Disney shit himself, but they still have that legacy of, we've got to cater to a certain American conservative audience. And I think that that's a mistake, because they're not the people who are putting their bums on seats in cinemas. That's starting to change now in the Disney organization, particularly when it comes to Marvel and a few of the other intellectual properties that they have. Probably with the Acolyte thing that they're doing in Star Wars, because it's got a little bit of a queer angle to it, though how much of that is just cynical manipulation is for other people to say. For all the good things Disney's done to cinema, it's also done some bad things. It's also impeded the progress of cinema away from just being an entertainment for children. Even though 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is kid-friendly, leaving aside the sex workers and the death cult at the end, as Nemo is dying, his sailors decide they're going to go down with the ship, and none of them want to live, and they nuke the island. Leaving aside those two aspects, which aren't usually part of Disney films, it's a pretty bloody good science fiction movie, and I enjoy rewatching it occasionally, as much for the special effects and those little bits of business between Kirk Douglas and Peter Lorre as for anything else. It's enjoyable at that level of a film buff enjoying a film with certain actors doing certain things in it, and also as someone who appreciates special effects work. It's a joy. I'll be interested to see what Nautilus does with the intellectual property too, by the way. If it scared Disney, it's either going to be a bad series, or it's going to be a series which is a little too edgy for Disney. I'm an optimist with these things until I'm proven wrong, but I do want to see Nautilus and just see where it goes with this French tale from the 19th century about an Indian prince who takes on pretty much white supremacy. So that's it for this time around. Two 1950s movies, very different. One much more adept than the other. But still, both of them with entertainment value. Both of them in some way speaks to the time in which they were made. And both of them have a certain rewatchability, even though 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea is way ahead by that mark. Nonetheless, Rod Taylor in an early role, I'm up for that. Rod Taylor taking his shirt off in an early role, there's something for everyone there. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. The reason I ask you to do all that stuff is it brings the video to the attention of YouTube and presents it to more people who might enjoy it. So if you enjoy the video, clicking like and subscribe and putting a comment in gets it to other people who think similarly to you. Thumbs up for that. You can also support the channel by becoming a patron at patreon.com/terrytalksmovies. Next up, I've got a movie that's been requested, and during my last live stream somebody actually paid me money to review this movie, and I'm still having thoughts about it. And then later on next week I've got some new releases from Umbrella which are science fiction, and which are mind-blowing science fiction that usually take 2 or 3 viewings to really appreciate. So until I hit you with all that, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies, watch 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. You're going to have a good time and sing along with the song, and I'll catch you next time.